been around a long time. We talked a little bit about it 4 years ago, and a lot of people joined the effort in the last 4 years, a lot more. But even today, this message of liberty is spreading. We get criticized also for the foreign policy of minding our own business and providing for a stronger national defense because they don't understand. But guess who should understand the most? Those who are serving, who have served in the military, and guess who they support for the presidency of the United States. Most people know that I've served in the military. I was in the military for 5 years. There's no other candidate that has been in the military. Some people say, oh, they just support you because you're in the military. That's partial, but I don't think that's the whole thing. I think it's the foreign policy and the concern and the commitment that I would never send troops into a war that is not declared, know exactly who the enemy is, fight it, win it, and get it over with and come home. We take an oath of office to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I can reassure you that the foreign enemies are not a threat to us. There's nobody on the verge of invading us, believe me. We have more weaponry and we spend more on our military than everybody else put together. So this whole idea that we're on the verge of being attacked, this was true when I was in the military in the 60s. The Soviets were a power. Of course, they bankrupted themselves and their empire ended. But we have to realize that we don't have this fear. We don't have to keep spending more and more and more. Matter of fact, the more we spend, the more we send our troops overseas, the more bases we have, the more drone missiles we use to kill people, the less safe we are. We're not safer by running that policy. It's a detriment to our national security. I believe it is a major part of the devastating budget deficit we have. We've spent $4 trillion that was put into our debt in the last 10 years with our overseas commitment. So this bringing troops home, you don't have to put them out of the military immediately. The immediate effect of bringing troops home rapidly would be that all of a sudden, all those military personnel would be spending their money in this country, not in Germany and Japan. Of war, whether it's a war overseas or a war against the American people in a war that they call the war on drugs, I think we should stop all those wars. It's actually a war on our civil liberties, and we have seen this systematically, especially since 9/11. 9/11 was a serious matter. I voted to whatever we can to go after those individuals responsible. I was discouraged rather rapidly after 9/11 because they used it as an excuse to do something they had been planning on doing for 6 years. And my first speech against the Iraqi war was in 1998 because it was clearly evident to me that they were going to do that. But after 9/11 occurred, it seemed like it took about 10 years to get one guy with all the weapons and all the technology we have. It takes 10 years to find him. But what did we do? We went into Iraq, we went into nation building and invaded these various countries. You know, if you add up the contractors, we've lost close to 9,000 Americans in this period of time, 44,000 severe injuries. We have hundreds of thousands of veterans today begging and pleading for help. We have an epidemic of suicide of people who have come home from Iraq and Iran. So it is very, very high cost, and obviously it would be much better if we had not gotten involved. But in the other area, at home, the real enemy right now, in my estimation, because I do believe we have a powerful, efficient military, so I don't believe we have to worry about it. But I do believe in the second half of our oath of office that we have to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So once again, shortly after 9/11, within a week or two, there was a bill brought to the floor that had been floating around the Congress for several years, but it never had enough support and they couldn't get it passed. But on after 9/11, they said, now is the time that we'll pass this wonderful bill that's going to protect the people, the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is very, very unpatriotic, if you want to know. So that bill was passed rather rapidly. It is, one member of Congress told me he had to vote for it. And he says, I didn't have time to read it, but it was called the Patriot Act. And how could I go home and explain it if I voted for it? I tried to explain to him that was his job. He was supposed to go home and explain why he voted the right way. In the bills, you may have noticed this already, but in Washington they name a bill, and the name always sounds pretty good. It's just assume, maybe not 100%, but just assume that the name of the bill will be opposite of what they're trying to do. But if they had called that repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, maybe it wouldn't have passed so easily. Especially at airports, always a consequence of the Patriot Act. As far as I'm concerned, private property and individuals should be protected, but they should be protected by the property owners and not by the TSA. And look at the pictures we've seen on televisions and newspaper of the poking and the prodding of little children to elderly women in wheelchairs and making us think that we're safer because of this. It is impossible. I think it's there to intimidate us and make us compliant and listen to the government. This is what happens when you move from freedom to a tyrannical state. They want you to obey the government instead of obeying your own hearts and your own mind, your own property. But the Patriot Act certainly was a big problem for us, but it's still ongoing. You may have heard that the National Defense Authorization Act was passed. And I'm very impressed that you know what I'm talking about. Because I'm convinced you didn't hear it on evening news, so you must be getting your news someplace else. But this is a very, very piece of legislation. It passed in the Senate and the House. The President gave us a Happy New Year by signing it on New Year's Day. But the real wicked part of this, it changed our history in many ways because civil laws should always be enforced by civil police and local police. But now it is institutionalized, it is codified. It says the military now can arrest any American citizen, put under arrest, no lawyer, no charges, no trial, can be put in prison indefinitely. Now this needs to be changed. We will not be living in a free society in a republic because it will be used. They don't write these laws not to use them. 1 year ago, the president announced, he had somebody come to the Senate, and he came and announced, he says, well, it is now the policy of the United States that we can assassinate American citizens. I mean, where does he get this power? Where does he get this power? Where does he think he gets the power? But we cannot let this stand. But to prove his point from his side, he's already used it. He's used it 3 times. He picked a guy that he decided was a bad guy. He may well have been a bad guy. His name is al-Awlaki. He doesn't live here. He's an American citizen. He was in Yemen. But he wasn't charged. He wasn't tried. He wasn't arrested. But he was assassinated because he was associating with bad people. But he was never convicted or even accused of a crime. So they get him. They kill him, and nobody's going to worry too much. But the next week, they decided that he had a relative that was an ally of his, so they said, we need to kill him too. So they went over, and they dropped another drone missile on him, and they killed his son. It turns out, though, his son was 16. He was barbecuing out in the backyard. This is not what America is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about the rule of law, and we all are supposed to be protected.
Yeah!
Our economy is not going to be revived until we come to our senses. We got into a mess because we spent too much, we had too much debt, we borrowed too much, then we printed too much, we regulated too much, and then we depended on the Federal Reserve. But when the crisis hit, it became obvious, and of course it was predicted by many that it would come, the bubble finally burst, and guess what the solution has been? Spend more, tax more, print more, and continue to do the same thing. And then they wonder why they're not getting good results. We have to decide whether we want to have a free market economy with sound money, a gold-backed currency, restrain the Federal Reserve, and restrain the Congress from spending money. Cut the budget by $1 trillion. People get nervous and say, well, if the government doesn't spend $1 trillion, won't that weaken the economy? No, it's going to help the economy, because to spend it, they either have to inflate, which hurts us all, or they have to take it from the economy and spend it. And I've met a couple politicians, and I've met a few bureaucrats. They don't have any idea how best to spend your money. Only you know how to spend your money. A couple of basic questions. The first basic question, what should the role of government be? Should the role of government be there to run the entitlement system? Should we believe this story that entitlements are rights? People now like to have the shock effect because they know what my answer is going to be. Do people have a right to medical care? Do they have a right to a food, a right to a house? And I said, no, they don't. They have a right to their life. They have a right to their liberty. If they had a right to keep their property, then they would be able to afford it. When government does it, they end up not getting anything. The entitlement system has to be challenged. The foreign policy has to be challenged. The monetary policy has to be challenged. And quite frankly, the others aren't doing that. It's all the status quo. Whether both parties, yes, they sound different, but the goal of most people that I've ever met has been more power. The arguments are real between conservatives and liberals.